Hi, I'm Detroit City Councilman James Tate, representing District 1, and it has now been 7 weeks since the governor issued the first stay at home executive order in the state of Michigan, and the loss of life caused by COVID 19 has changed our community forever. As we begin to finally see the numbers of deaths and reported rates of infection decline, we must remain vigilant. But if these trends continue, it's reasonable to expect the governor to begin to relax some of the rules to allow many of our local businesses to cautiously reopen and many of the activities that make us feel normal to carefully resume. One activity that we know that will not begin anytime soon is young children heading off to school buildings to be educated in classrooms. In April, in an effort to prevent the coronavirus from spreading to Michigan's 1.5 million students, Governor Whitmer ended classroom learning for the remainder of the school year. This caused many questions from parents that still remain to this day. And what about next school year? Well, joining us today is Dr. Nikolai Vitti, Superintendent of the Detroit Public Schools Community District, who will lay out the plans that DPSCD has to educate our children during the pandemic as well as beyond. And what is DPSCD doing to ensure that our classrooms do not become the breeding ground for coronavirus transfer in the future? Well, Dr. Vitti, we want to thank you for joining us today. We know you're a busy man, got a lot going on, so we're going to make sure we make the best use of your time. But before we start, I just want to ask, how are you and your family doing in this very challenging situation? That's extremely important to us.
Yeah, thank you for asking, and thank you for doing this. So I feel good. My immediate family is well. Obviously, my extended family has been impacted this more on a socioeconomic level, just job loss and people living together to try to share resources and assisting in that way. But fortunately, my immediate and extended family is healthy. Obviously, have lost some friends and people connected to the school district, which has been hard, but the immediate family and extended family is healthy. Struggling a bit financially, but we'll make it through. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, this is a very tough time for so many people. It's life-changing for this country, this world, as a matter of fact. Want to take us now into where we've been talking about the COVID situation. I know when the governor issued the state of emergency, stay-at-home order, kids were sent home from school, doors were shuttered. One of the big concerns was that the children who on a daily basis receive food from the school system wouldn't have an opportunity to do that. And I know that through you and your partners, you guys made sure that that was not the case. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? And that's all the way back in March 26th when the order was issued. Talk to us a little bit about what you all have been doing at DPSCD, please.
Yeah, for starters, we supported the governor's decision to close schools and move to distance learning. I was one of the first superintendents to make that recommendation, and I feel like the governor did listen to those recommendations. It was a hard decision, but one that was in the best interest of children and our employees, and I think the greater community, considering the large numbers of individuals that would be concentrated in one space. But one of the first things that we did when we did close is to move to give food to the community. So right now we're averaging about 100,000 meals a week. We're relying on 19 schools that are providing 3 breakfasts and 3 lunches on Mondays. And then Thursdays, 4 breakfasts and 4 lunches on Thursdays to carry families into the weekend. So the feedback has been very positive about that, and the numbers are fairly consistent, about 100,000 families served a week. In addition to that, we shifted to online learning. And so we're up to about 60% of our parents and family students engaging through online learning, and that's pre-K to 12, reading, math, science, and social studies. I want to commend our teachers for making that shift. It has not been easy, and especially on our students and families that made that shift. And we also printed academic packets as well for those families that didn't have consistent access to a device and internet. And we've given out over 30,000 packets. So those packets have gone to parents beyond DPSCD, obviously charter parents and some others that live in the city. So we're serving everyone from food to academic packets. And things aren't perfect, but I think everyone's trying to do their best to continue learning during this hard time.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. I mean, it sounds like you all are placing layers on top of layer of services to try to address the needs of the parents and students. What's been the feedback so far? I mean, you talk about the computers and the internet that's been provided. Talk about the foods that's been provided, the educational packets. What's the feedback you've gotten from the students, the parents, and the teachers even?
So as I said, and as you know, none of this has been easy. No one could imagine what all of this would look like, how we continue to provide educational services. So I don't want to paint a picture that is one that is full of roses and, full of colors and sunshine. It's been hard, but I think we've all work through the struggles to do everything we can to provide students with some level of instruction. I think the feedback varies on the type of student, and that happens normally in the education process. There are some students that are in home environments where they have a device, they have internet access, they're at grade level, they're really supported by their parents, and this has been an inviting opportunity not to have to go to school every day and work at home. For other students, it's been hard because they don't have a device. The internet is not strong enough or wide enough for learning and consistency and learning, just so the bandwidth isn't strong enough. So they get kicked off when they're online. They need more individual help. Their parents aren't necessarily in a position balancing work and home needs and balancing multiple jobs or even having the comfort to directly provide instruction. So I would say it varies based on the family and the student. But one thing that really has come out in all of this is how much students miss each other. I hear that from teachers, but now that we're on this platform called Teams, which is similar to Zoom, students can send me what would be like text messages, and they often say, "Hey, Dr. Vitti, how are you doing?" And we get in a chat, and I say, "How's online learning?" And they say, "It's all right." And I said, I'd say, "Which one do you prefer?" And they say, "Well, I just miss being with my friends." And honestly, I hear a lot of that. And it's, when you think about being that age again, it makes sense. I mean, I think the hardest thing is not being with your friends, with your peers. And that's been hard outside of just the trauma that's linked to COVID and the impact it's had on families from obviously deaths, illness in the hospital, fear. And so all that's playing out with our students. And I think our teachers are doing a good job to reach out on a wellness perspective. We created a hotline, not only to help parents, but we created a social emotional hotline. So we have guidance counselors, social workers that will answer the phone if parents need to talk to someone or our kids need to talk with someone. I think we forget that when children go to school every day, it's about teaching and learning the core academics, but it's also that social emotional piece that's so important to our students, to have an adult that loves and cares for them, that can advocate for them and just talk to. A lot of our students, I feel, are just isolated right now. And I know there's social media, which allows some level of connectivity, but that face-to-face warmth, I think a lot of our kids are missing right now.
Yeah, and we often talk about, in addition to the social and emotional challenges, diving back into the educational piece, we talk about the summer learning loss that many children go through in the 2 months that they're off during summer recess. We're now looking at 4 months if we just count the time that they've been out. Do you have any concern that children won't be able to, quote unquote, make up that time as they move forward and progress, and they'll be somewhat behind?
Yeah, I think any superintendent, any educational leader, any teacher that would say that our students have not taken a step back because of this crisis academically would just be lying or not telling the truth or wanted to sugarcoat the reality. You just can't take away what happens on a day-to-day basis in a classroom with face-to-face instruction. With that said, and it goes back to what I said a bit earlier, I think every student's situation is different during this at-home, on-learning process. Some students, I think, are continuing to learn, think, they're growing intellectually, they're reading more. Other students are maybe slightly maintaining, and many of our students are really just falling farther behind because they just don't have that consistency at home and that push and support at home to learn like they would in the classroom. That's why we have traditional public education. That's why it's so important, because regardless of what's happening in the home, you go to school, you can be provided with that kind of higher expectations and support that you may not receive at home, just based on the reality that families are facing from a socioeconomic point of view. So I'm hopeful that by July we can introduce some level of face-to-face instruction to try to catch students up. We'll continue online learning. And then as we go into the fall, if we can go back to face-to-face, I think we're going to have to think about the right number of students in the classroom, the right number of students in the building, testing for COVID, maybe temperature checks. We're working on those things right now, but we're going to have to think about longer school hours, I think, maybe more weekend exposure and opportunity, just to try to accelerate the catch-up process that many of our students are already behind, but this COVID situation has put them either even farther behind, unfortunately. But like we always do, we're going to hustle and work hard and try to narrow that gap as rapidly as we can.
And so there may be some folks who are watching who don't have children within the school system. How are the kids being promoted, or what happens to a child right now who's, let's say you're in third grade when the shutdown began? What happens in this next academic year? Is that child now promoted to the fourth grade, or what happens, Dr. B?
Right. I would say most students will be promoted to the next grade. What we've done is we've looked at where a student was academically as of about March 12th when school was closed. And so if a student was on the path of passing, either from their grade or just the work quality that they were submitting in classes, then they would be promoted to the next grade. At the high school level, well, I would say really at all grade levels, but probably most relevant for high school, is if a student had a D- or higher by March 12th, then they would just get a pass as a grade. So thinking of the pass-fail system, it would just have a pass on their transcript, and then they would receive credit for that class. If they had a D- or a D, less than a D-, which is obviously an F, then they would have a fail, and they would not gain credit. So that's why online learning now is so important, because those students that had an F can do more work during the online period to try to convert that failure to a pass and gain credit. And that's why we're going to expand summer school and online learning in July to try to catch more students up. But I would generally say, for those listening, most students will be moved to the next grade. That looks differently at the high school level based on the number of credits that the students had.
But right now, during this distance learning, they're not being graded
No.
A, B, C, D.
No, our teachers are providing feedback on assignments that are turned in, and maybe grades are given based on that individual teacher, but they're not, it's not part of the future grade. Now, students can improve their standing, again, going from fail to pass, but they're not getting, for example, an A, B, C, D, or an F as a grade that would go on their transcript or their report card through online learning. It's all an enrichment.
Got it. And you know, this time has been an opportunity for all of us to reevaluate everything that's going on in our society, the disparities, all of the challenges that we have. One of those huge challenges that has been so prevalent, unfortunately, is the way the teachers have been treated and thought about for many. Let me just say that. And my mom's a former teacher, so I love teachers. My wife's an educator as well. But we do know that there are some individuals who don't think so highly of the individuals who help educate and raise their children, essentially, when they're not there. Do you think that this time, where those folks have been forced at this point to be really their child's primary educator, that hopefully this will help change some of that negative viewpoint, vantage point that these individuals have on teachers and the profession of education?
I'm hopeful. I mean, I think you said all that well. There's no reason for me to repeat what you said. I agree. You know, in crisis can come opportunity, as we both know, and it can highlight some discrepancies, inconsistencies, and inequities that already exist in our society. And I think COVID certainly has done that. it really is up to leaders after that point to do something differently about it. Whether we're talking about healthcare, whether we're talking about access to jobs and job security, whether we're talking about the digital divide. All of these divides and equities have always been existent in our society. And I think the COVID crisis allows us to put a magnifying glass on things that have always been there and now think about what do we do differently. The optimistic side of me says, yes, based on the fact that now parents have to do more with their students educationally at home, the additional stress that creates with balancing life challenges and work, hopefully it could lead to greater recognition that teachers are just as important as doctors and nurses, engineers. I'd always say they're more important than lawyers. I don't know if everyone would agree with that. But the point being that when you go into the teaching profession, you should never think about income. You should never think about whether you can support your family. It should be one of the hardest professions to get into. But once you get into it and you prove yourself, it should be one of those professions that is highest paid and most supported and appreciated. And so, as you said, unfortunately, a lot of people play politics and games. You didn't say that, but I'm adding to it. And that's what we see play out in our country, especially in Michigan. I'm optimistic, but the cynical side of me says the same excuses will be used to justify why teachers don't receive more pay and why traditional public education, especially in the urban core, continues to be at a disadvantage to other districts throughout the country and in Michigan. That's the cynical side of me. So hopefully the optimistic side wins out.
Yeah. Have you had a chance? I know you're busy crafting the plan for DPSCD, but have you had an opportunity to speak to any superintendents of other school districts around the country or even the state of Michigan?
A little bit. DPSCD is part of what's called the Council of Great City Schools, which is all the large urban school districts throughout the country. So we've been on conference calls. They share some of our real challenges, and then some of the challenges are just different because in so many ways, Detroit is by definition just different than other cities throughout the country. But I think everyone, to some degree, is struggling with just shifting the delivery of education and what that means from a device, internet access point of view to students with special needs, to teachers having to rely more on technology. I mean, there are commonalities of challenges across the country, and then based on the concentration and level of poverty, that's when the challenges become a bit separated and different. But I think everyone is struggling to some extent. I think what's on people's superintendents' minds more than anything else is the extent of budget cuts that will happen at the state level due to COVID and what kind of impact that will have on their budgets. Luckily, Congress passed the CARES Act, which will provide some support to districts if state budgets decline. So I think we should be in a good place in Detroit, at least, for maybe a year or two, and we can protect everyone's job, keep incomes where they are and not cut, and still move forward with the reform. After a year or two, if we don't see additional funding at the federal level, then I become concerned about reducing some of the initiatives and reform and then going into thinking about layoffs. But I think we're in a good place for the next 2 years. At least we can maintain what we've done and not lay people off.
Got it. We're going to wrap up very shortly. I want to kind of take us into the future. You talked a little bit about it early on. What are we thinking about in terms of models? I mean, I know you mentioned potentially smaller classes. We're certainly going to have a different care and concern when it comes to janitorial and custodial issues. But what are some of the models that we're looking at potentially for this upcoming school year when, and we know it's going to happen, when the stay-at-home order is released, whenever that is?
So the business community's investment in the children of Detroit, I think, will allow us to think out of the box and differently. So with the $23 million investment in June, every DPSCD student will receive a device and internet access for 6 months. And I think that allows us to think strategically differently, and I think do things that are more aligned with what we should be doing from a medical health safety perspective. So specifically what we're thinking about is obviously limiting the large number of students in a building at once. So at a place like CAS, for example, where you have thousands of students there, we just can't have that many students in the building at once. So thinking about maybe a Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule, and other students come in on Tuesday and Thursdays, that will lessen the amount of students in the building. Thinking about students not switching classes, so staying in one room, and then the teacher coming into that classroom, which will limit the large number of students maybe in the hallway. Trying to reduce class size so you have fewer students in a class and they can do more social distancing. Doing more of a blended model where, as I said, some days you might be doing face-to-face and other days you're at home doing online learning, and we can do that now with devices and internet access in June. Obviously thinking differently about not going to the cafeteria and eating in the classroom, so bringing the breakfast and the lunch to students. Obviously deep cleaning classrooms after they're used. Thinking about requiring COVID testing as employees come back. Maybe some level of temperature checks for employees and students when they come in. Those are the kind of things that we're thinking about right now, and all those details have to be fleshed out, and people have to weigh in before we move forward. But those are some initial thoughts that we're working on going into the school year.
Wow. So, I mean, when we talk about the challenging job you had before COVID, just hearing all the difficulties that you have now, I don't envy your position, and many people don't, but we're glad that we have you in that position because you clearly have had your eye on the ball from day one. We appreciate you being here, joining us. Anything you want to add before we wrap up?
No, thank you for the opportunity. You're very good at this. I don't know if you're going to go into the media at some point, but your interviews flow well. I would just say again, I want to thank our teachers for all they're doing in this transition. I want to thank our students for just being, as they always are, persistent, just being tough and working through these challenges and issues. Our families, for being patient with the district and supporting their students at a higher level. And I would just say come in the next couple of weeks, we'll provide the details on how to pick up a device, and the internet access will come embedded in the device. So we're going to take care of that, and really just urge parents to continue learning. If they can't do the packets and they can't log on, at the minimum, just encourage your child to read. Talk about what they're reading, encourage writing, in a journal, but just keep the mind moving. I understand all parents and families are in different places right now regarding what they can do at home, but at the minimum, keep reading, moving, have conversations about what you're reading, and just keep the critical thinking going in the home to sharpen minds and ideas and thoughts as we continue to stay at home.
Got it. So we know that there are currently, I believe, 17 locations where 17 locations where families can pick up ready-made hot meals, lunch, and breakfast. We're going to make sure we have that information out to the public and scroll it along the bottom. We just, again, thank you for joining us, and we wish you all the best, you and your family. And please drop by anytime. We're open ears, and we welcome you every time you decide to drop by. Thank you for joining us. The implications of COVID-19 will no doubt have a lasting effect on our children for many years to come. And while the youngest among us may not be the most susceptible to falling physically ill to the virus, at least that's what the scientists say, there's no question that the psychological effects will linger. Even more challenging and in question is how adversely the pandemic will affect their academic outcomes long term. The school closings were necessary to lessen the spread of the virus. But once again, the disparities among our various communities were exposed. Children in need of food, students without access to devices or connectivity for distance learning, parents who had to leave to go to work and not privileged to stay at home to help their kids with their lessons. Despite the issues that you may have with our public school system, you have to recognize the considerable amount of work that has been done in such a short period of time to address many of these issues. No, as you heard even from Dr. Vitti, everything is not perfect. But as we begin to envision life after the pandemic, it is the hope of many that we will not simply go back to normal because that wasn't working so well. Hopefully, there will be a greater sense of empathy for others, and teachers will receive more respect, appreciation, and support for their important roles in society. It's been said that with every crisis comes a real challenge as well as real opportunities for transformation. And if we all keep the overall development of our children in the forefront, we not only have a chance to improve upon the way they learn today, but more importantly, we stand to revolutionize the entire system and elevate not only their lives, but the lives of everyone around them. It's all connected. Thank you for watching, and as we continue to remind you, stay safe, stay strong, and at least for now, stay home unless absolutely necessary. We'll see you soon.